Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with another in my series of essential works for classical music beginners. And for this particular talk, I have, I think, a really interesting list, one that you can really enjoy and sink your teeth into, and you're going to have a lot of fun with. It's 10 theme and variations pieces. You know, one of the things I've always said in my various chats, in fact, I just did another one on tips for critical listening, which you can also enjoy if you feel like it, is this. All musical form consists of repetition and variation. That's what form is. That's how you make bigger pieces of music. And one of the most basic, fundamental embodiments of this concept is a piece that is nothing but an idea and a series of variations. Now, that kind of form is naturally going to be very sectional. In other words, you have variation 1, then variation 2, then variation 3. Depending on the composer and depending on how he structures them, those variations may be grouped into larger chunks, or they may be very separate, one right after the other. And so you're not going to get the kind of continuity that you heard, for example, in my talk on 10 essential symphonies for each movement of a symphony. But the principle is the same: repetition and variation. Now, variations can take many, many forms. Zillions and zillions and zillions of forms. You can vary just the melody. You can change the melody in some way, in any way you want, any way your mind can conceive. Or you can vary other aspects of the melody, its rhythm, its shape, its structure, depending on how you do it. All of these things are going to come into play in these pieces, but we'll talk about them a little bit as we get to each work. And, there is one, I have to say, there is an elephant in the room, which I am not dealing with in this talk, and that is the Goldberg Variations by Bach. Because the Goldberg Variations by Bach are based on a completely different principle than the variations I will be discussing. And we'll touch on that in a moment. They will be the subject of another conversation. I don't think that they're actually essential for theme and variations pieces. They are essential as one of the pinnacles of Western art. That's another topic. So I think we may get to them in another list. But for this list, we're starting out with the kinds of variations that started happening from the classical period onward, basically, where the subject of the variations is the tune. And the issue is, in each variation, sometimes you'll hear the tune, sometimes you won't. It depends what the composer wants to highlight. So let's just get to it, because these variations have been, I've chosen them very carefully. As usual, the list is somewhat chronological. It involves some works that share the same tune, which makes them kind of fun to follow. It also contains a progression of variations for just keyboard or another instrument, a solo instrument of some kind, to variations for orchestra, to variations for keyboard and orchestra, which I think will make for a nice selection once you get into them. So let's go. Number 1, Mozart. His famous variations for piano or keyboard, it could have been a harpsichord in Mozart's day as well, on vous, dirai-je, maman. What is an vous, dirai-je, maman? Well, it's a French folk song. And the French folk song is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or Baba, Black Sheep, or the alphabet song, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. That's the tune. It is one of the most famous tunes in all of Western civilization. Many people are unaware that Mozart wrote a set of variations based on it. And here it is. Now, one of the things I put in the list below this video so you can see all the works, I have indicated how many variations there are in each work. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to sit there and count. It's like, it's 2, 3, 4. You don't have to do that. It's not necessary, but I want you to know generally what to listen for. And if you want to keep track and try to keep track, you should go ahead. It's perfectly fine. So this piece has 12 variations on that tune. Now, one of the things it's worth pointing out is that in many, many sets of variations, the tune comes in two pieces, and both pieces are repeated. So it's like da 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 da. Then it's repeated. Then da 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 ba 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 da 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 da. Then it's repeated. So you get the opportunity for the composer to write variations of each repeat. That can happen as well. And when that happens, it's called a double variation. It's a technical term, but I wouldn't worry about that either. You should just know what it is, because one of the points of these chats is that I'm going to feed you the terminology. So as we go, and you can keep it in mind or forget all about it, it's your choice. The important thing is just to listen to it and enjoy. So this is the first and most basic of our variation pieces. It's absolutely delightful, wonderfully delicious. And then we're going to go to a different type of variations entirely with Mozart's great compatriot and colleague Haydn. Haydn wrote a work called Andante with Variations in F minor. It's also for piano. It's an amazing piece of music. It's a dark piece of music. Just the opposite of Mozart's Jeu d'Esprit, his light and delicious piece of variations. This is a very serious work, a very deep work, a profound work even. But it is double variations in a different sense. It's variations on two themes, one in the minor, one in the major. The two themes are related to each other melodically. You can hear it very, very clearly. And there are only two variations of each. It's 2 plus 2. 2 minor key variations, 2 major key variations. And then there's a very extended coda, an ending, a free form coda that summarizes the entire emotional impact and emphasizes it and really takes piano technique about 100 years into the future. It's a remarkable work. It's about 15 minutes long in most performances. And that opening is very similar. Do you know the funeral march from Chopin's Second Piano Sonata? You know, the one that goes bum, 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 da, 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 da. And the accompaniment is boom, 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 like that. It's a march. That's what this is. This is the prototype for that later piece, that later famous piece. And then the major key version, the second theme is of course brighter and somewhat more lyrical. And you will hear simply 2 variations of each. And then this phenomenal ending where the emotion, the strictness of this alternation between 2 themes just breaks free. It breaks free in music of completely unrequited passion. It's an extreme piece of music and really an amazing work. And I really recommend that you give it some serious time and listening when you have a chance. Now, this idea of variations on alternating themes, on 2 themes one after the other, became extremely, extremely important in later music, and particularly in symphonic music. It was a form that Haydn used in many of his symphonic slow movements. Before this is a late work of Haydn's from the 1790s. But in his earlier symphonies, he used this 2-theme variation form very, very frequently. Beethoven used it for the slow movement of his 9th Symphony. And there were quite a few other later composers when they wrote big slow movements. The Grand Adagio, for example, in Mahler's 4th Symphony uses this kind of double variation form. And so it was an important invention of Haydn's. Just about everything he did was an important invention, but this particular form was one of the most important, and you will encounter it in many, many, many future works in all kinds of contexts, not just as a pure theme and variations, but as a movement within a larger work. So you should keep that in mind, and that's one of the reasons I chose this, because it's important for your future listening as well as just an amazingly gut-wrenching and impressive piece of music all by itself. So number 3, Beethoven. Yay! Beethoven, the Eroica Variations. also known as Variations and Fugue in E-flat major for piano. Now, the Eroica Variations are based on a tune that Beethoven couldn't get out of his head. He used it in at least 4 spots. It began life as an actual dance number, a little German dance, a contratan dance, a dance. He wrote a set of dances for people to actually dance to. And this particular tune, he thought, oh, this is such a great tune. It goes do 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 do. And just as important as the tune is the accompanying bass line, which is boom, bum, boom, bum, dum, bum, 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 bum. It's like you get 2 for the price of 1. And the bass line is just as valuable in terms of its ability to be a subject of variations as the tune. So when you listen to the Eroica Variations, you have to pay attention to those 2 different components of the melody. But they're very distinct, and so it's really a wonderful way to hear them. But then at the end, Beethoven writes a fugue. Now, a fugue is one of the most revered and learned things that you can do in music, but it's actually quite simple in concept. All it is a tune in which a certain number of parts, or voices as they're called, follow the initial one. So you have a tune and it gets played, and then another part comes in playing the same thing, and then another part comes in playing the same thing at different degrees of the scale. That is, if they all played exactly the same thing one after the other, you would have a round, or a canon, as it's called in music, right? When everyone does, like, row your boat, when everyone does the same thing one after the other. But in a fugue, they enter at different pitches, which makes harmony when they all come in, which is rather interesting. And so a fugue does that. And it does that in various scientific ways. You know, there can be interludes called episodes where they're not playing the tune, and then the tune comes back, and it can come back in more rapidly staggered entries, or you could stretch the thing out, or you can play it backwards or upside down or sideways. You can do anything you want. The reason to have a fugue is because the variation form, as I've told you before, is very sectional. It tends to sort of, they lay there, 1, 2, 3, then the next one, then the next one. And so you want to have a summary, a finale, something that puts a good ending on the thing. Haydn, has this free-form, extravaganza emotionally. It's not based on counterpoint, that is multiple voices at once, but a fugue is a big, imposing kind of blob of music that you could stuff at the end of your set of variations to make for an impressive ending. And that's what Beethoven does. Now, there are 15 variations in this particular work, and it's a big work. It's a lengthy and very elaborate piece of music, and a joy. Just a joy to listen to. It's just wonderful because the tune is so catchy. And it's so catchy that makes following the variations really, really interesting, whether you hear that tune or whether you don't, because you can't miss it. That's one of the advantages to having a really simple tune. And you heard that in the Mozart too. If you've got it, you'll find often in theme and variations works that the actual theme is something very simple, because you want to build on it. You want to make it complicated. You want to change it. You want to have freedom to do all kinds of things with it. And so the simpler the basic idea, the more juice, the more energy, the more freedom you get in your variations. If your variations are based on an incredibly elaborate tune, there's nothing really to vary. All you can do is simplify it. You can't do anything. That's the key, actually, as I just mentioned, to the Bach-Goldberg variations, which are sort of, like I said, it's the elephant in the room. They hover over all of these pieces because the actual theme that Bach chooses isn't the subject of the variations at all. It's so elaborate and complete in itself. That's not what he varies. He varies the bass line. He varies the accompaniment to the theme, which is rather more simple. And that's why I didn't include the Goldberg variations here, because it's not the kind of work where you're supposed to actually listen to a tune and hear what a composer does with it. And that's the goal of this particular exercise. It's to hear how composers manipulate melodic material And that's not what Bach is interested in. So that has to be a different topic. And we will get to it. Don't worry. Don't worry about it. So next, oh yes, here's a composer you probably haven't heard of. His name was Alkan, Alkan. In English, we call him Alkan. It rhymes with calcan, the dog food. He was a French piano virtuoso of such ability and formidable, that's the word, formidable technique, that even Liszt got nervous when he was around. He wrote a considerable body of piano music which was as good as unknown until just a few decades ago. It's been revived by these tremendous piano virtuosi, and he was amazingly quirky, a real romantic piano genius. And he wrote a piece of music, oh my goodness, called Aesop's Feast. And Aesop, Aesop's fables about animals, and the variations tend to represent different critters, little animals. You get to guess which ones they are because they're not all indicated. This is a wonderful, 10-minute piece of music, 25 variations in 10 minutes, which means it's a very, very short theme. And the theme is quite similar to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, although it's in a minor key. It's yum, bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 ba, 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 bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. That's the whole theme. It doesn't have two halves that are repeated. You only hear it once. And off it goes into this phantasmagoria of craziness. It's so much fun. Oh my goodness, it's fun. It's also amazingly disturbing in parts, almost tragic. This is part of a huge, huge, major opus collection of works, his Opus 39, which is 12 etudes, that is studies, technical studies, in all of the minor keys. And what makes these things etudes and all studies is they don't really focus on individual aspects of piano technique like Chopin's etudes do. These are just extraordinary exercises in virtuosity for the soloist. And Aesop's Feast is just one of the most entertaining and enjoyable variation works you will ever hear in your life. I'm not kidding. So just go listen to it. You're going to love it. I guarantee it. And it really is. It's just nothing like it at all. Full of personality and color and strange sounds on the keyboard. Next, we're going to jump away from the piano for a minute, well, partly, to talk about Paganini, the great violin virtuoso. Now, he wrote a work called 24 Caprices, a caprice being a flight of fancy for solo violin. And these 24 caprices end with a very, very famous piece of music. His Caprice number 24 for solo violin alone, is a theme and variations. It's a theme with 11 variations on a tune that everybody used later. It is one of the most famous subjects for variations that you will ever hear in your life. It goes dum pa da 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 dum pa da 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 dum pa da 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 dum bum bum pa da 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 dum pa da 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 dum pa da 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 dum bum ya da 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 dum pa da 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 pa da da. Anyway, you may know that. You may have heard it, and it's going to come up again, so don't worry. It's a remarkable work, and nobody listens to the original of it. Everyone listens to the things that other composers did later. And I think we should start with the original inspiration. So Paganini's Caprice number 24 is a theme with 11 variations, and one of the first composers who grabbed that theme, who knew a good tune when he heard it, was Liszt. Liszt wrote a series of pieces. They were called etudes. We call them the Paganini Etudes for piano by Liszt. That's what we call them. He called them different things. He called them 6 grand etudes. He called them transcendental etudes after Paganini. He called them all kinds of things. Just consider them the Paganini Etudes number 6. And he made a piano version of that thing for solo violin. Now, naturally, a piano, you've got all these fingers to deal with, can do a lot more in terms of simultaneous notes than a violin can. So, I mean, however virtuosic Paganini is, and it's insanely virtuosic. So Liszt's insanely virtuosic etude is based on Paganini's 11 variations, and you can start your journey into the Paganini theme with the Liszt Paganini Etude No. 6. And you're going to have a very good time doing this. I mean, one of the things about this, I just have to tell you, it's just so much fun. I mean, you'd think, okay, it's a theme and variations. It's a dry exercise. It's not a dry exercise. It's a hoot. It's just a riot of invention and imagination. And it's hard to describe because you have to just listen. Talking doesn't do it. But to just the joy, the thrill of hearing composers taking a thing and molding it and sculpting it and changing it and diddling it, and it's just marvelous. The satisfaction you're going to get from listening to this music is incredible. It's just I can't even tell you. So next is Brahms. Hey, Brahms. So now we've finished the solo instrumental piano and one solo violin variations thing, and we are moving on to variations for larger forces, larger groupings. And Brahms did use the Paganini theme. He wrote two sets actually of Paganini Variations. They come in two sets, books 1 and books 2, and book 1 and book 2. And you can go and listen to those if you want, but that's not the piece I've chosen for our purposes. For our purposes, I have chosen his Variations on a theme by Haydn. Now, this is for orchestra, or there's also a version for two pianos. And you can listen to either of those, but it's the orchestral version that's very famous. This is a big tune. It's a big, long tune. It's also called the St. Anthony Chorale, and it's not even by Haydn, we have since discovered. But Brahms thought it was. And you know what? No one knows who actually wrote it, so we might as well give Haydn the credit for it, right? I mean, why not? Anyway, it's a wonderful tune. Da da dum bum ba da 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 bum. Just a delightful tune. And there are only 8 variations. But it's a big piece. It's about 25 minutes in most performances. And it just goes to show that these variations are extremely individual. Many of them are not based on the tune at all. They are variations on the underlying scheme of harmonies, so that you're not going to hear the tune necessarily. You should just listen to the character of each variation as it comes. And when Brahms wants you to hear that tune, you will. You'll hear it very, very clearly. He doesn't make any he's not trying to fool you. But these variations are very highly characterized and beautiful pieces. Each is like a little tone poem, a little nugget of emotional expression. And at the very end, like Beethoven had a fugue, Brahms has a thing called a passacaglia, which is Italian. It means to walk through the street, to go through the street. Passacaglia in Spanish. It's actually a Spanish dance form. And it consists of a bass line. We talked about this in the Essential Symphonies talk in the finale of Brahms' Fourth. Brahms loved passacaglias. And this particular version is a bass theme. And the bass theme in this case is the theme, the Haydn theme. Bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. Just the first bit of it repeated over and over and over in the bottom for the most part. And then you have other things on top of it, variations on top of the passacaglia theme. And that's what a passacaglia is. It makes a wonderfully imposing finale. It starts out, let's put it that way, imposing, and then it just becomes fun and happy, and you get a triangle jangling along in the orchestral version. It's just brilliant and great fun. So that's a sort of a classic piece of orchestral variations. Another one, which is just as brilliant and very, very different, is Dvorak's Symphonic Variations for orchestra. Now, the Symphonic Variations contains a theme and 27 variations in about 20 minutes. It's a very, very short theme. And it's a very quirky theme. When Dvorak wrote the symphonic variations, he was taking up a challenge. Someone told him to pick a theme that you could never do anything with and do something with it. And he did. The theme is a chorus that Dvorak wrote called I Am a Fiddler. And one of the fascinating things about this theme is that it has a very strange phrase structure. And what I mean by that is that music normally falls into very regular shapes. And the number 4 is the important number in music. It was the number in Haydn's 88th Symphony, you may recall. 4-measure shapes. Well, these are prime numbers. You have a theme in 7 measures, then you have a central section in 6, and then a closing bit, a return of the opening actually, in 7 measures, which makes the whole thing sound very lopsided. The tune is ya da 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 dum bum 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 ba dum. Notice how that theme sounds too short? It should go da 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 dum, or something like that. It sounds like it's missing something. Then you have a middle section, da da dum bum ba da dum bum ba da dum bum ba da 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 dum. Then the repeat, da 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 dum bum 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 dun 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 dum. It's really a quirky theme. You can see why they would have said to Dvorak, you can't do anything with that. And he created a masterpiece. That's what great composers do. It's so much fun, this piece. It begins with a very simple treatment of the theme. And as it goes on, it begins to wander through different landscapes where you may lose sight of the actual theme. But that theme is so characteristic. It is so quirky that whenever it comes up, or a piece of it comes up, you'll immediately know it. And, because it's so short, Dvorak groups the variations into larger chunks that are connected, so that the piece actually has, sort of major sections, almost like a symphony. It has groups that fall into well characterized emotional and expressive bits. And it also ends with a fugue based on that tune. It's just endless fun. A great work, and the source of quite a few later sets of variations. The idea of this theme, that is a first simple phrase, then a rising middle phrase, and then a return to the first phrase, that became the paradigm for a whole other series of variations. And you're going to hear one of them next. It's Elgar's Enigma Variations. Now, the enigma you don't have to worry about. The enigma is a theme that Elgar said somehow runs over the entire work, and nobody knows what it is, and it doesn't make any difference. He took the secret to his grave. It doesn't matter. The Enigma Variations are a remarkable work in which each variation represents one of Elgar's friends, and we know who they are. And so, if you get a recording of it, you can look at the liner notes, or you could look it up on Wikipedia or whatever, and you can see who each variation represents. Now, this is a theme with only 14 variations, but it's 10 minutes longer than the Dvorak Symphonic Variations. So what does that mean? It means that Elgar's theme is a big theme. It's a long theme. First of all, it's a slow theme. And in music, slow means big because it takes more time to play. But the structure of that theme is almost identical to the Dvorak. That is, an initial phrase, a rising middle section, and then a return to the initial phrase. That is the shape that Elgar, who knew Dvorak and knew Dvorak's Symphonic Variations quite well, definitely took as his inspiration. But the Elgar piece then takes that idea and goes off in an entirely new direction. And this set of variations does not end with a fugue. It ends with a final variation representing Elgar himself in his most grandiose form. This is where the full orchestra with the organ, it has an organ, comes cranking in at the end, and it just makes this glorious climax, along with his wife, who is the first variation. One of the variations is a dog. One of the variations is a trip on an ocean liner. I mean, there's all kinds of fun stuff happening in these variations. So, it's one of the most famous pieces of orchestral music and written in the beginning of the 20th century. It was written like 1900. It inaugurated the 20th century in fabulous fashion. So, these three bits of variations, the Brahms, the Dvorak, and the Elgar, are all for full orchestra. However, the next two are for piano and orchestra. Now, piano and orchestral variations, it's a wonderful idea to have a solo instrument when you do variations. Why? Because you can alternate. You can alternate variations for the soloist, or variations for the orchestra alone, or variations for the two of them combined. Just the setup, the logistics, gives you an entirely wonderful ready-made forum in which to display your variations. And these two sets of variations are both based on tunes that we have already heard. First, there is Ernst von Dohnányi, or Erno Dohnányi, the Hungarian composer, his variations on a nursery tune for piano and orchestra. And the tune is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or vous, dirai-je, maman, the same tune that Mozart used. Only here you have this, it's a full orchestra and piano, so this is a big work, 25, 30 minutes long. There are only 11 variations. They are extremely elaborate. You'll hear the tune sometimes and you won't hear it sometimes again. But they are so colorful and so much fun and so full of life. And at the very opening, I just want to tell you, the opening is hysterically funny. It's a huge, tragic, really tragic, dark, gloomy introduction. It could not be more dark. And the idea, of course, is to set up the actual introduction of the theme on the piano, which you can play with one finger. And it's extremely funny. The contrast is hilarious. But the point I want to make is that if you listen to that introduction, you may notice the theme coming in. It's in there. It's in there. I leave it to you to find it. All I can tell you is listen to the horns and think, da, 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 da. Think about it that way and then go for it. Oh my God, what fun this is. But the last piece is the famous, unbelievably famous Rachmaninoff Paganini Variations on a Theme by Paganini. Or the Paganini Rhapsody, as it's sometimes called. Rhapsody on a Theme by Paganini. It's called all kinds of things. But the Rachmaninoff Rhapsody, the Paganini Rhapsody, which we'll call it, is one of the all-time great pieces of music for piano and orchestra. And it's based on the Paganini theme that Liszt used, and Brahms used, and Rachmaninoff used, and Lutoslawski, the Polish composer, used, and Boris Blacher, the German composer, used. Everyone loved that theme. But this is the greatest piece of music based on that theme, and it's so famous, it's more famous than the original. People all know it's a theme by Paganini, but we all know it as the Rachmaninoff Rhapsody. It is an extraordinary piece, 24 variations on the Paganini tune, and it has one of those luscious themes. Oh, it's so beautiful. The 18th variation. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, da 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 da. You know it. Ya da 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 da, ba da da da. But here's the genius of it. It consists entirely of the theme, that tune, played upside down or inverted. That's what it is. And from that, Rachmaninoff creates one of the great tunes in all of music. That's what geniuses do. And this piece, that 18th variation, you've probably seen, if you watch figure skating, for nowadays, figure skating is quite different because they changed the rules. But before then, I used to find music for figure skaters, Olympic skaters and professional, competition skaters. And one of the things they always wanted to skate to was the Rachmaninoff Paganini Rhapsody and the 18th variation. The 18th variation. If you go up to a classical music person and say 18th variation, they're going to say, oh, Rachmaninoff, the Paganini Rhapsody. Yeah, right, sure. I mean, it's that famous. It really is. But with that, we conclude our wandering through 10 amazing pieces that take advantage of the variation principle to write themes and variations of all different kinds. And the basic ideas that I think you should keep in mind is in all of these is that A, the theme is very simple and very catchy. I mean, that's the idea, to have a simple, catchy start so that you can go off and do other things. And then B, depending on how long the theme is, composers can write either very separate variations, as Brahms does, or you can write groups of variations that share emotional and expressive characteristics, or you can write, as Haydn does, variations on two very lengthy themes, so you have very few of them. I mean, all of these factors are things to keep in mind. How long is the tune? What shape does the tune have? How does the composer group his variations? There's no one answer. The joy is the discovery. It's discovering the variety, the ceaseless variety and the boundless imagination of the great composers who wrote these extraordinary works. So go for it. Keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much. Take care.